Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Martin Ogle's talk, Sapiens. I'm Grace, and I work for the library here, and we want to thank you for being here with all of us today. So Martin received a BS degree in wildlife biology from Colorado State, and then his master's in science in wildlife science at Virginia Tech. He had a 27-year career as chief naturalist for the Northern Virginia Regional Park Authority. In Arlington, Virginia, Martin served on energy and community sustainability task forces and boards of organizations ranging from environmental to historical to social work. In 2012, Martin received the Arlington, Virginia Green Patriot Award for his outstanding work in sustainability. This award is jointly awarded by George Mason University, Arlington Chamber of Commerce, Arlington Department of Environmental Sciences, and Arlingtonians for a Clean Environment. Martin moved to Colorado in 2012 with his wife Lisa and twins Cyrus and Linnea, and started his own education and consulting business, Entrepreneurial Earth. And you can sign up out there for the email list. So thank you all so much for being here. Let's welcome Martin.
Okay, we're first going to do a sound check. Sounds good? Yeah, thank you. All right, well, thank you so much for coming out on this rainy night. It's nice to see the rain, and it's nice to see you here in this beautiful setting. I'm really grateful to the library and to the staff here for making this available for us and allow me to share a few thoughts with you. Before we get started on the program, well, I want to thank these organizations that helped get the word out tonight, and they're all great organizations, so take a quick look there and get involved with them, come to know them a little bit if you don't know them. They're all in the same direction, the same spirit as what this program will be tonight about our relationship to Earth. To start with, I wanted to point out that most everyone here probably would recognize that we have some immense challenges before us. And that part of the ability to solve those challenges is going to be our ability to get a read on the situation. What's happening? What are the forces at play? What needs to happen to make changes in this gigantic battleship of a problem that we have? The problem right now, though, is that our information, our actual work, is so siloed off into little pieces that we can't see the relationship between different things. And it's my fervent hope that this program tonight will help us see a way in which we can find the interrelationships between different aspects of our world so that we can head them all in the right direction. So you probably thought that this little guy is Homo sapiens, and you'd be right, because he and all of us here were named that 267 years ago by Carl Linnaeus, the Swedish botanist. But during that time, we have certainly learned a whole lot more about ourselves and Earth and our relationship to Earth. A lot of this has come through scientific advances just in the last few decades, but we've also, during that same time, come to rediscover indigenous ways of thought that really are dovetailing with the most modern of sciences. And we'll kind of stress this a lot tonight, that modern science is rediscovering what our ancestors in this room knew. They weren't dummies. They knew their relationship to the planet. So that's why I think we should start calling ourselves Geosapiens, where Geo is the Greek goddess of Earth, Ge or Gaia, and sapiens is wise and discerning and aware. And we can become the earthwise human. We can also become aware that our wisdom really is literally, not just metaphorically, literally of the earth. If you think that we evolved out of this planet, then our wisdom is literally the wisdom of the planet, and we'll see which direction it takes us depending on if we recognize that very fact. So I'm going to share with you 5 vignettes, I call them, and we're going to also have 4 mini-vignettes. Those will remain a little bit of a surprise. But 5 vignettes. The first one will be about a living planet. The second will be a relationship between humans and life, a new cultural narrative that will help us navigate through this confusion that we are in now, and then human creativity. How are we going to creatively address the problems that we face? And then finally, a few concluding thoughts. The first one, the living planet, will be the longest, and they'll progressively get shorter because our emphasis is on our ability to understand scientifically and metaphorically and symbolically that Earth is alive. So we'll start with the living planet. Well, years ago, I worked in Arlington, Virginia, as was mentioned, and I worked right in that little spot of woods there where that red dot is. And I was there for 27 years as the chief naturalist for the Northern Virginia Regional Parks, right across the river from Washington, D.C. And way back in the late 80s, we already had a guiding principle, you might even call it a mission statement, was we were trying to promote the understanding of the interrelationships between human beings and the rest of the living system. One of the things that I really loved doing there was leading canoe trips on the tidal wetlands just south of Washington, D.C. There's a shot of it up there. And one day, right after I went out on a canoe trip, turns out I went to my first professional conference, and I flew out of National Airport in D.C. and flew right over the marshes that I'd been on the day before. And it suddenly struck me because the marshes looked very similar to something that I'd seen in a biology textbook a few days earlier, and that was this. That's the cross-section of a human intestine. And there's folds upon folds upon folds for the exchange of gases and nutrients. It's both of them. And I had those thoughts dancing around in my head when I got to this conference, and what do you know, one of the very first sessions that I went to was on something called Gaia theory, which is, at the time, Gaia hypothesis, the idea that Earth is a single living system. Well, James Lovelock, the progenitor, who, by the way, died just a few years ago at age 102, he says that Earth is seen as a single physiological system, and it's an entity that's alive at least to the extent that, like other living organisms, its chemistry and temperature are self-regulated at a state favorable for life. That really resonated with me, and as I was heading back, I had the great fortune of being able to stop in Colorado on my way back to the DC area, and I got to go up into the Rocky Mountain National Park, and I was hiking up there with all these thoughts dancing around in my head, and I came to the conclusion that I'd been educated wrong, at least incompletely, and that was because one of the main things that I came out of wildlife biology with was that biology was very separate from geology. You still could take a course in it in a natural resource school, but there was very little overlap in terms of the subject matter, and you could easily get through a biology major without ever having taken geology. But I found that geology and biology are extremely intertwined, and far beyond just the fact that there's life on rocks. It's more that on planet Earth, geology and biology are really just two faces of the same cycle, and we'll see some examples of that here in a sec. So I got back to Virginia and the Chesapeake, and she looked alive to me now, albeit on a bad hair day. And I started looking and finding all sorts of ways in which the entire living system had analogies to, say, our body. So here's a bog and a liver, and they're both filtration systems. And the great deltas of the rivers have a similar look to our capillaries, and they're also where things are laid down and picked up again. So really, it's not just a geobiosphere, it's a geobio-hydro-atmo-anthroposphere, and anything else you want to throw in there. Anything that you end up studying and want to study, you need to put in that conception of Earth as a physiology, because they are indeed all intricately connected. Well, how, and how did this come to be? One of the first things that really gave me shivers thinking about was the fact that our sun, in the 3.8 plus billion years that life has been around, has heated up, or its luminosity has increased by 25% at least. So that means that we really should have been fried off the surface of this planet long ago. And in fact, if we had the same atmosphere as our two neighbors, Mars and Venus, we would be. The ranges of estimates go all the way up to 290 degrees Celsius, obviously uninhabitable. But that's not what happened. There's a much lower and pretty even temperature profile over billions of years. And sure, it went up quite a bit. Far too hot for us to survive, by the way, but just a little bit. And then down below that, say the ice ages, but over time, much, much cooler than it would otherwise you'd expect it would be. And that's because, just like a cell membrane regulates the life of what's inside by allowing certain things in and not others, and certain things out but not others, our atmosphere is doing that exact same thing for life of the planet. It lets certain things in and not others, and out but not others. And it's the way that our physiology evolves and changes. You might say that climate change is a changed atmosphere. So in response to this heating up of the sun over vast periods of time, we're not talking short-term global warming here, over vast periods of time, the rock, air, water, and living organisms, and that includes us, now that we're on the scene, are all part of a physiology that's been slowly evolving to that forcing factor, if you will. I think this is tremendously profound. And it's not something that I've heard when I go to listen in on classes, especially in high school, but even in college courses. This is what forces the evolution of everything at the surface of the planet. So here's one example of that. The mountain you see up here is alternating stripes of limestone and coal. And limestone and coal are both products of life. So the coal is literally carbon from plants, and limestone is calcium carbonate from sea life. And that's what formed that mountain. And when I considered that mountain, which I believe, I'd have to go back and check that particular one, but it was about 400 million years old, I realized that mountain was 400 million year old atmosphere. Because the carbon dioxide that was in the atmosphere and in the water was taken up by plants and sea life and sequestered away as rock for millions and millions of years. And that too was a shiver moment for me. I'm part of something really big here and slowly evolving over vast periods of time. One way that the limestone is produced is through this beautiful marine algae called the coccolithophore. And it's got a calcium carbonate shell that when it dies, it settles to the bottom. And they're found in huge biomass quantities. This is a bloom of them off the coast of Ireland. And it just so happens that we have in our midst a coccolithophore expert. Matt Fife is at CU, and I'll let him tell you a little bit about himself, but you see some information up there. And he's going to tell us a little bit about the massive cycle that coccolithophores take part in and what they're doing some really curious work with at CU.
I can speak quite loudly, but maybe that'd be better. I was invited to chat with you guys about coccolithophores because I happen to be a marine biologist that lives in Colorado, which is sort of weird, but there we go. And because coccolithophores are a really exciting organism in the oceans, they make up a whole lot of the calcium carbonate that gets produced, which Martin mentioned produces quite a bit of our limestone. Thank you. But they play a really interesting role in the cycle of sulfur in the earth as well. And sulfur is a compound that doesn't readily sort of become bioavailable to organisms on the land. And so coccolithophores are pretty important in delivering sulfur to land that way. In doing so, they play a really fun role with the atmosphere that kind of highlights a lot of what Martin's been talking about. The coccolithophores sulfur sort of runs off the land where it reaches the coccolithophores. And in times when the coccolithophores are growing a lot, they produce a sulfuric compound called DMSP, which I can't pronounce. But that turns into something called DMS, dimethyl sulfide. And dimethyl sulfide is the most common cloud condensation nuclei that we have in our atmosphere. And cloud condensation nuclei are the little particles around which clouds form. So when DMS gets into the atmosphere, which happens in a natural process through wave action, clouds form and sunlight gets blocked and temperatures sort of decrease, and also the sulfur gets delivered onto the land again. But what that means is when coccolithophores are growing a lot, there's a lot of DMS in the atmosphere, and so they shade themselves. So when temperatures rise and they start to grow, they start to recognize that if they grow too much, they'll be competing for nutrients. And so in theory, they shade themselves, cool down the ocean, and therefore regulate their growth and the climate. Coccolithophores are really exciting not only because of this, but because we work on them at CU Boulder, where we're working in the civil engineering department to produce carbon negative, hopefully, or at least carbon neutral cement. So this is not what you guys came to listen to, but concrete is a part of our world, and it's the second most used material on the planet after water. And it accounts for something like 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a really important wedge in our fight against climate change. Calcium carbonate is integral to cement production. About 80% by mass of it is calcium carbonate limestone. Normally we mine it in quarries. And to create cement, you have to heat it up to 1450 degrees Celsius. And that releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere through this process called carbonation. Not only does it release carbon dioxide, but it takes a lot of energy to heat up furnaces to that temperature. And limestone cement, these terms can get complicated. Cement makes concrete. Concrete is what the structure is probably built out of. And limestone cement is just cement that's been kind of diluted a little bit with raw limestone. So we're growing coccolithophores in our lab in 100-liter photobioreactors. We're heating it in a lab-scale oven and then turning it into cement in the hopes that we can photosynthetically produce our own limestone, which draws down carbon from the atmosphere since the cells grow for photosynthesis. And then there's byproducts from the cells that we can use for biofuels or for other purposes. The end result are these cubes that you can see over here. They're 1-inch cubes. We're not making enough right now to build buildings, but we're proving that this is a possible technology. Sorry, I jumped ahead. So just to finish my little mini vignette, we are really inspired by these coccolithophores, not only because of their capacity to produce an interesting, sustainable cement, but also because this type of technology might help people understand their relationship with the built environment a little bit better. Too often, I think people feel like they're removed from the natural world inside a structure like this, but if they knew that the materials that this building was made out of were organically derived and much more directly maybe than mining something from a quarry, they might feel more inclined to feel a part of this earth system that Martin's been talking about. Thank you.
Well, this is very much part of the living system. So what they're doing in the lab at CU and all sorts of other things is part of that system.
It goes back to the 1850s. Is that true?
The 1800s, I don't know the exact date, but it was actually a Swedish scientist, and I can't pronounce his name, that first hypothesized that this would be happening, just based on the burning of coal, I think, at that time. Yeah, it's a long-term understanding that we have. Well, we'll end up this Living Planet section with just briefly introducing Lynn Margulis. She arrived at these same ideas from the standpoint of a microbiologist, and she's the one that came up with the idea of endosymbiosis, the idea that evolution has created cells with multiple parts that used to be free-living organisms. So in what you see up here, there's these formerly free-living cyanobacteria that are part of this larger organism. Well, she came to call Gaia symbiosis as seen from space, because she recognized that the water and the air and the rock and all the organisms, including us, were so tightly enmeshed as to be in a the most giant symbiotic system of all. So this first vignette we end just to remind ourselves that Earth is a living planet. Well, now we're going to have another mini vignette that will be a little different. I'm going to invite Felicity up to the stage, and she's a guitar player and instructor, and she's got some music that we're going to set to some slides of Earth, and then down onto the Earth, and then into our human existence here that will make a bridge to the next vignette.
Thank you.
Thank you, Felicity. A nice break to tide us over into the next vignette, and this image of photosynthesis going from the southern to the northern hemisphere and back might be thought of as our planet breathing. And so our next vignette will be looking at the relationship between Earth and humans. And we all have one, of course, and we all contemplate it more or less, and especially depending on where we've lived. You know, some people might have lived in one place for all or most of their lives. Others have moved around a lot. And I myself was born and raised in Korea, and that's me on that farm stand about 64 years ago. And growing up in this not only foreign, but foreign to me now, but Asian culture, I think, gave me a predilection for ideas both Gaian and also having to do with the person I'm going to introduce next. Even in first grade, we started learning about the meaning of the flag of Korea. And it brought together all these things that we're talking about here, the balance of opposites, but also the circle of that, meaning the people, symbolizing the people. And earth and heaven and water and fire are the opposites on the flag, but signifying government. And then the white background being the people. So all these are on one flag as a kind of an organic whole, and that's what you grow up thinking about and learning. So when I came across the work of Kongjian Yu, I was right there with him right from the start. He is now one of the foremost architects and landscape architects in China. And his company, which you can look up, it literally means earth person or earth human. And when I first heard him, it was of all things at a conference in Sweden, where my ancestors come from. And he started off by talking about the yin-yang symbol as the basis for Chinese traditional thought. And he then talked about how it influenced the feng shui philosophy and how it was used to do essentially everything in ancient China, everything from the shape of the roofs and buildings, slowing down the energy of the water, for instance, to the siting of communities where the wind and the water energy coalesced. And then the one on the right there is one that I think of a lot. He said that when they designed the paths and roads in a community, they made them tortuously curved. And those are his words, not mine. He says that you need to have those tortuously curved paths so that people met often by accident. And then if you don't do that, the human energy dissipates. So I was really following his work ever since. And now he's doing just stupendous things. He's putting together something called the Sponge City movement, where they're taking these formerly channelized and polluted waterways in China and restoring the wetlands, and then putting these walkways through so that people can learn and enjoy those wetlands. And then how about this Yellow Dragon Cave Theater, where it's in a limestone valley and it's ventilated by the prevailing winds. It's made out of limestone, and it has one of the biggest green roofs in the world. So this is the kind of thing he's doing now as a result of blending the traditional ways of looking at things with modern science and techniques. Well, there's one interpretation about how all this came to be that I find fascinating. That is that in ancient China, they took shadow lengths throughout the year, and they put that on a graph, and they came up with a sine wave of longer and shorter shadows. But then, because they knew the cycle of the seasons, they interspersed or placed that data onto a circle, and that's the probable origin of the yin-yang symbol. And in fact, the ancient yin-yang symbols looked quite a bit different than the one we have, the classic one now, and that's because they came directly from these kind of graphing, and also they varied with latitude. But now we have the classic yin-yang symbol that is the formation of the philosophy of China. Well, it's also been used, and I use it as a symbol for a scientific concept of negative feedback. And negative feedback is how all systems work, living systems, mechanical systems. If they're functioning properly, they have a negative feedback system where if it goes too far in one direction, you pull it back this way. Goes too far in the other direction, you pull it back the other. So we can see just through this one little illustration that we can start to see ourselves as part of Earth through both science and indigenous and traditional thought. So we'll move on to, if we do think of Earth as alive and we think of ourselves as part of it, then can we form a new cultural narrative around that? And this, to me, I think is one of our society's greatest needs right now. We have to have a new story, a new cultural narrative that's going to drive us in the right directions and not either in the wrong directions or haphazardly. And so we first have to recognize that the cultural narrative has to be accurate to our situation. If it's not, it'll lead us to disaster. And Jared Diamond, who wrote Collapse, which some of you may have read, he put it this way: perhaps the crux of the success or failure as a society is to know which core values to hold on to and which ones to discard and replace with new values when times change. So this is where I'll circle back a little bit to James Lovelock. He was the one that came up with the Gaia theory, and when he was working with NASA back in the 1960s is when he came up with this idea of a living system. And he went back to England in the 1960s, and one of his neighbors was this man. You might not recognize him. You may know his name, William Golding. He wrote The Lord of the Flies. And he's the one that suggested the name Gaia because he said the science that Lovelock was telling him about was the most powerful idea he'd ever heard. And he said that it needed a powerful name, and he suggested Gaia because it would recognize the fact that Western science was now rediscovering what our Western ancestors knew at a gut mythological level. And that history lesson, that's real history there, I think should be taught in all schools and celebrated at all levels so we can start to internalize this new cultural narrative. The Lord of the Flies has been perceived as a very pessimistic book. And this is just one of the many reviews I found online that go along these lines. But did you know that even here in Boulder County, there's high school teachers that are reevaluating this book as not a pessimistic book, but a warning that we need to have the right cultural narrative. And if we don't, we end up like those poor kids on the island. He himself, Golding himself, when he was presented the Literature Award and Nobel Prize in 1983, characterized himself first and foremost. He said, "I came to Sweden regarded as a pessimist, although I'm an optimist." And I'll play just a short clip of his acceptance speech here for you to listen to directly.
Now we, if not in the spirit, have at least been caught up to see our Earth, our mother, Gaia Mater, set like a jewel in space. We have no excuse now for supposing her riches inexhaustible, nor the area we have to live on limitless because unbounded. We are the children of that great blue-white jewel. Through our mother, we are part of the solar system and part through that of the whole universe. In the blazing poetry of the fact, we are children of the stars.
It's quite striking coming from the author of The Lord of the Flies, huh? And of course what he said is a reflection of our indigenous roots all over the planet. But because he came up with this name as associated with the science, it gives us double power of connecting the old with the new. So I think that this statement, which I put up earlier as a kind of a scientific reflection of a living planet, can and maybe should be the basis of that new cultural narrative. The way we word it and the stories we write will be as varied as there are people writing and speaking and so forth. But if this can take the center point of our new awareness of ourselves and life, then I think we can look forward in a much more optimistic way than perhaps we can now. So this vignette is just simply that we need a new cultural narrative that recognizes ourselves as a seamless continuum of a living planet. So here we have a mini vignette by Vanessa Tabernetti, who from Naropa University, and she runs something called Earth Magic Academy, and she's going to talk with us about intuition and this idea of geosapiens.
Thank you, Martin, for the opportunity to be here this evening and to speak about intuition and its importance in the role of geosapiens. Warning, I've been waiting 25 years for this 4 minutes. I've had the opportunity for the past 6 years to teach Gaia theory, Earth systems, and indigenous science and cosmology, as well as nature and education and sustainability right down the road at Naropa. Aligning with Gaia theory has taught me to rely on the wisdom of the earth as one living system that continues to rebalance herself, which she has done for hundreds of millions of years. Yes, we all need to continue to be more diligent in making decisions that support all life and can't be willy-nilly out-of-control consumers. However, understanding on a scientific level how Gaia continues to rebalance herself has actually relieved much personal climate anxiety over the years and given me and many others much hope. My husband and I have also run Earth Magic Academy for the past 7 years, where we have helped over 1,000 people by illuminating their purposes through connecting them more deeply with the earth and source energy. We do this through a myriad of classes, workshops, programs, and readings. When we first got started, we wanted everyone to talk and listen with the water and with the trees and hear and feel what the earth was communicating. Rather quickly, we realized that people did not trust their intuition. We began an intuitive skills building class where for the past 5 years, over 200 people have come through to trust their intuition more. It is incredible what we have seen people do with their lives and their communities through deepening their relationship with the earth and utilizing more of their intuitive senses. The Pomo people of Northern California and the San Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert speak of a period in history when all life spoke one language. As a species, we have lost the ability to communicate with life in this way. There are many scientists who are now writing about the underlying communication other species have with one another, but why would we be excluded? I believe intuition is an important key in remembering this language with Gaia and actualizing our role as geosapiens. We are sentient beings, and our intuition is our ability to sense more deeply into our human experience. It's not woo-woo, but rather a part of our human nature. It is a sensory informational system connected with all life. And as seen here, it can come in many ways. As we are part of the earth and not separate from it, intuition helps us to remember our oneness with all life. This is how we are wired. Being in active reciprocal connections with all beings can dissolve the illusion of separatism that has kept us convinced of false disconnection for way too long. When we can be aware of and eliminate the false programming from society, religion, and our familial systems that has kept us from accessing and trusting our intuition, we can tune in to what the earth is actually saying. And oftentimes it is more hopeful than what we are fed through guilty doomsday narratives. When we take the time to be with nature, to be still in nature, not just running or biking or talking or texting our way through it, we can realign with the electromagnetic frequency we are wired to with Gaia and sense more deeply into our intuitive senses and communication. This can help us be more clear on our role and purpose collectively and individually as geosapiens. When people are living their lives on purpose in this realization that all life is connected, then there will be more clarity and happiness and less pain and confusion, causing less rapid destruction of our beautiful and wise Gaia. We can have more respect for all sentient beings because we are respecting more of our truer version of ourselves. So, the next time you receive information from your deeper senses, maybe you hear a whisper or see a vision, maybe you taste your way forward or feel the butterflies' emotions, trust that. Sit still, get serious or curious, you can get serious too, and following a life that is more connected with this language of all life. Listen for the guidance in how to live in better harmony with more joy for yourself, others, and all life. This is doing your part and evolving into the Geo-sapien species. Thank you, Martin.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm enjoying these mini vignettes even more than I thought I would, all of them. So the second to the last section is human creativity. If we are a part of a living planet, if we have a relationship with it, if we're a seamless continuum of it, and we need a new cultural narrative, how are we going to put all those together, but in actual practical service of making our world more in balance with living systems, sustainable, if you will? Well, here I'll introduce a book, and it's called A Deliberate Pause, Entrepreneurship and Its Moment in Human Progress. And I know the author, Larry Robertson. He lived in Virginia where I lived, and we had great talks about this book. And in fact, it's the source of the name of my company, Entrepreneurial Earth, because he said that entrepreneurship is not a business term, or he didn't consider it a business term. He said it's innate human creativity. And so he gave examples of people all over the spectrum of the world doing really creative work and showing how that was entrepreneurial. Well, since I do believe that we sprang out of this planet, then literally, not just metaphorically, I think that we're Earth's conscious creativity. Settle on that one for a little bit. This planet has a creativity that's billions of years old in terms of unconscious evolution, but then the human type of consciousness evolved, and now we're the ones that have that conscious creativity. And if you look at it that way, I think it kind of forces the issue of responsibility. There's no one going to come and change this. Those of us that might feel like we have the creativity tied to the realities of the planet can and should do things in different ways. One of these, many people have heard, is biomimicry, where Janine Benyus said that we need to consciously emulate nature's genius. As it's worked out, mostly this is known through various products, which is good, but we need to go beyond that. So here's a very traditional yet insightful person who was the CEO of Interface Carpet. And back in the 90s, he came to the conclusion that the way they made carpet was ruining the world for his grandkids. And so he worked with a gentleman named William McDonough to come up with a new way of making carpet. But he said it this way: I used to think that my job didn't have anything to do with the environment, and then I realized that my job, as well as everyone else's jobs, impacts the environment in some way. And now advocating for sustainability has become my number one responsibility. Well, he took these actual principles of nature and put them to work in how they envisioned and created carpet. So the first thing they did was they're the one that started those carpet squares that you now see fairly often. So if you ruin one part of the carpet, you just replace that one square, not the whole thing. And then the other thing is that they worked with green chemists to come up with non-toxic and recyclable carpet fibers, such that at the end of the life of a carpet, you don't landfill it, which unfortunately most carpet still is. You take it back to Interface Carpet Company and they make new carpet. So it seems like a kind of almost a no-brainer way of doing things, but it took some intentionality to create that new way of doing things. And then we can look at the nitrogen cycle, which is critical to living things in life, but we now need to recognize that we actually form 50 or more % of the nitrogen cycle through fertilizers and emissions. Well, we can use that knowledge to just do things different. So here's these beautiful planters. Aren't they beautiful? They're public urinals. And they're not in action right now, but they not only grow the plants in the planters, but they harvest the urine and they use it to fertilize the green roofs in Amsterdam, which they lead the world in. And now they literally also take it and fertilize farms. There's a lot of nutrients, a lot of nitrogen, phosphate, potassium in human urine that is otherwise polluting the world as opposed to being productively used. And then there's these women in Vermont who are doing the same thing. They're harvesting human urine for fertilizing farm fields in Vermont. And this company in California that just started a few years ago, and these are all examples of how we can displace the fossil fuel-based nitrogen fertilizers that we're so dependent on. We need to learn the principles of life. These are some of the symbols I use to symbolize some of the important principles and apply them to everything we do. Otherwise, how can we have a green economy? And one of the most important of these principles is how energy moves through systems and how our human energy systems fit in. So the kinds of programs you see up here with everything from elementary to high school students are the kinds of programs that I've done a lot in the past and hoping to do more and more of as time goes on. So this vignette concludes with the idea that we're the conscious creativity of the planet, and so how are we going to use that conscious creativity? And I want to bring up our last mini-vignette presenter is Stella Corzine, and Stella's been working with me on this All Careers initiative in high schools, mostly in high schools in our area, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her experience and thoughts about the All Careers initiative.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Stella Corzine, and I am a current senior at Peak to Peak Charter School in Lafayette. I was first introduced to the All Careers approach during my freshman year of high school, when Martin was a guest speaker in one of my classes. Since then, I've worked on several All Careers initiatives due to my deep belief in its importance and its widespread applicability. The first part of All Careers is connecting humans to Earth's systems through education on Earth's principles. This step promotes climate literacy, which is currently at the forefront of debate regarding education, both in Colorado and at a national level. With such a newfound emphasis on creating climate literate individuals, the All Careers approach should be incorporated into high school education just as much as any other environmental emphasis. Bridging together environmental knowledge with knowledge about our economy, the All Careers approach can be applied to any student seeking to enter the workforce, as it's necessary that all individuals understand how they can contribute to the creation of a green economy, regardless of their vocational aspirations or aptitudes. Currently, there are few standards in the Colorado state curriculum that require environmental education. However, students and teachers have advocated for change. With the hopeful future adoption of climate-specific mandated standards, I believe All Careers principles can naturally be incorporated into education. We discuss our aspirations, we discuss our futures, and yet we fall short to consider climate, which so immensely can impact both of these considerations. By first identifying Earth as a living system, one in which we contribute to, and then considering the connection between our chosen professions and the environment, we can not only create a green economy, but also a climate-literate society. Thank you.
I've really enjoyed working with Stella and other high school students over about the last 4 or 5 years here in Lafayette and Louisville, and we're hoping to grow this program. So that brings us to the final section here, the concluding thoughts, and I'll start with a cartoon that maybe you've seen. I still remember seeing this in the Washington Post in 1985, opening it up and seeing it. And it's funny in part because it kind of jabs at the truth, right? I don't know that we have a brain the size of a walnut like a stegosaurus, but we're limited in the ways we're thinking right now. Are we going to be able to solve the challenges ahead with the ways we're thinking now? Probably not. We need these new cultural narratives. And yet it's really hard to come up with a cultural narrative when you have this disconnection. These are the pieces that I showed at the beginning, and if you look at these, you probably don't see any pattern unless you've seen this before. But if you look at a vision of how those pieces fit together, can you now see the dance of life popping off of the screen? Well, in a similar way, when we look at the world, which is even more complicated than just black blots on a screen, and we don't see how everything is interrelated, can we, through both this wonderful picture of the Earth from outer space, but also all the knowledge and perspectives that come through the various means that I've brought here tonight come up with the vision of how things fit together and then move forward productively with that. There's that picture from the first music slide we had up there, and I don't know if you are aware, this is known as the pale blue dot, and Carl Sagan wrote a piece about this, and I'm just going to read a few sections of it. Look again at that dot. That's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you've ever heard of, every human being who ever was lived out their lives. Every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father and hopeful child. Every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. He went on to write other things and ended with, this underscores that our responsibility to deal more kindly with each other and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. And that is a wonderful passage, and it's a wonderful picture. And I think it needs to be accompanied by these other aspects of understanding in order for us to be able to practically change the direction we're going. So I say that geosapiens is a way of thinking about this that can lead us in more healthy directions. But we have to get practical and real too. Here's an article that I wrote in Solar Today magazine by the same title here, Geosapiens, the Earthwise Human. But the more important part of that title is Creating a Sustainable Economy. And I've got a copy of it out there if you want to look, and the QR code there will lead you there, or you can Google it. But we need to take these big ideas and focus them on the economy. So if you want to continue this exploration with me, I urge you to join me on any of these aspects, these talks of geosapiens, but also energy education, environmental education, and job readiness, and putting those all together as an integrated whole. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to have some conversation here for a few minutes before we conclude. And we do have some mics that will be brought around so that we can get good sound and others can hear you as well. So if you have a comment or a question, there's one over there.
Yeah, my question is, we have a beautiful state here in Colorado, and we respect it greatly. But also, I come from Pennsylvania, where extractive economies have long ruled. So how do we get people to understand the Gaia principle? How do we get people to understand what is important in the world when they are just sort of focused on their narrow vision of the future and cutting down timber and taking things from the earth?
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that, but I have some ideas. And the first thing is maybe working backwards. I firmly believe in this All Careers initiative. And that's because there are already amazing case studies out there, I just listed a few up here, of people doing things that we kind of are part of our lives, and in the case of food, for instance, have to be part of our lives, that are vastly different than what we have been doing over the last 70, 80 years. And so if we can all come to see that, wow, life could be good, maybe better, using completely different ways of doing things, that would spark the idea that, oh, the future doesn't have to be freezing in the dark. I don't know if you recall, that was a phrase that was used in response to Jimmy Carter's talk about energy in the 70s. No, that's a false narrative too. We can have good lives, beautiful lives, interesting lives, healthy lives going forward, but we have to learn to do things differently. So I see that as a starting point. And then to the extent that people go, Yeah, well, then how do we do that? Well, then we need to study how life works and our role in it. And that's not, that's joyous and that's fun and that's interesting. It doesn't have to be a negative thing at all. And then we start to come to maybe the starting point that you brought up of how can we see that we're part of Gaia? People aren't going to really know even what Gaia you're talking about to begin with. But at all these levels, we can build ways of changing our cultural narrative. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Sean. I'm a student at Naropa University, about to graduate, and I've been a substitute teacher in Boulder Valley for the last year and a half. Primarily in Lafayette. And something that came to my attention, especially these last few times I've been subbing, is the amount of screen time the next generation is getting. When asking the students, they said that they all have Chromebooks, and these are usually middle schoolers, that they spend between 2 to 6 hours just on homework or on a screen for school, let alone the personal time that they take on a screen. And I'm concerned that this is going to create a disconnection with the next generation in the natural world. And I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more about education and how we can reach out to the next generation and help them connect to the earth and see this connection.
Yeah, it's a huge problem, and one that our people are aware of. And of course, in BBSD now, they're not allowing phone usage in high schools, at least. I don't know about, I would assume middle school too. And it's causing some interesting things to happen. A little bit of pushback, but like for instance at Centaurus High School, where I spend a lot of my time doing programs, they have a commons room, and they put in there I think air hockey and ping pong table, and now when I go in there, they're almost constantly in use. So it sounds a little trivial, but it's actually a great move. It's a way of saying that we're going to reconnect, play games, and all that kind of thing, and maybe that can grow. To explicitly address it, therefore, is what we need to do, and it's still a slow process even then. My big worry is that we're not spending time outside, as Vanessa said, without those screens and without those inputs, just simply feeling through our senses what life is all about. The very first person I heard about Gaia theory from, he wrote a book back in the 80s, and he identified at that time 53 senses that he said were scientifically out there that were ways that we connected to the world. And some of them were things like polarized light, things you don't think about too much, but yeah, that makes sense that we can sense polarized light. Others were very interesting, like the sense of community. And I thought, well, that's a nice metaphor. But he was, no, the real biological sense of community. So for instance, if you take a prairie dog and you take it out of its coterie and take them 100 yards that way, the first thing it does without delay is sprint back to its home, because it has a very powerful sense of community. A mountain lion, on the other hand, it's separated from other mountain lions most of its life. So they have different senses of community. Well, our sense of community is as social beings, and we need to try to figure out how to connect ourselves to each other too, in addition to the world as a whole. So those are just some thoughts. They don't necessarily answer anything, but we need to have these conversations more and more.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Eitan. I kept thinking on how to expand this idea and the thought of how the solar system and what a Gaia theory for our solar system would look like. And there's an Oort cloud that is at the edge of our solar system. It kind of acts like an atmosphere. And in the forming of our solar system, I don't know if it's Jupiter or Saturn, had to pull the planets from the sun for us to be in the Goldilocks zone we are. And I was curious if you have thought about that, if you have any thoughts on how can you translate this Earth is a single system to our solar system is also a single system, and it carries this intelligence all the way to a living universe.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have thought of it, and I've had kind of philosophical discussions with folks about it. My focus has been just on Earth as a system and our relationship to it, because especially now, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where we have to do these practical things. But even if you just think about what William Golding said, he was talking that language there. And philosophically, the kinds of thoughts we have about our lives, our communities, the earth, and even the universe, I think do make a big difference. And so to entertain that thought and conversation with others so that we can progressively incorporate or create this new cultural narrative, I think is a wonderful thing.
I'm sorry, Martin, I've got one more question. So, the current era we're in is called the Anthropocene, right? So humans are placing their will upon the rest of the world. As Gaia pushes back, do you think these principles you're talking about are going to be adopted? Or do you think that they will be rejected by a human society that is too selfish to understand what's going on? And I know it's a big question, but I'd love to get your take on it.
Yeah, you're asking these big questions tonight. Well, I think immediately of that cartoon. We're basically in that same place. I could be up here, people, the problem is serious. The climate is changing, and we have a cultural outlook the size of a walnut. And so the question is, are we going to be able to expand that? I don't know. That's what I'm working towards, and I think all of us are in various ways. So whether we are or aren't is an unsolvable question. But can we? In other words, let's not sink into despair, right? Let's not go from not even thinking about it to all of a sudden being despaired about it. Yes, we can be optimistic about it, and we can do things in a can-do attitude and engage ourselves with the world in productive ways rather than sitting back and either worrying or not worrying. So yeah, we need to republish that Gary Larson cartoon. Yes.
Okay. Is there a society of people like you around the world that get together and wonder how you spread the word?
Well, specifically with GeoSapiens, it's my creation. There was only one other place that I found it in use, and it was in a company in South Korea. But nowhere else. So, just as a point of fact, it's a starting point. As far as Gaia theory, there's people all over the world that consider Gaia theory, and in fact, much more seriously in other countries than we do here. In England, there was a Gaia Society, and it was where the nation's biologists and geologists got together to talk with each other when they first started realizing in the 90s that their two disciplines were really one and the same. So there's examples like that. Here in the United States, there is a gentleman in Massachusetts who started something called Gaianism. And you can see where that's going. It's saying that we need to kind of have religious thoughts, religio, relinking, that's where that word comes from, with humans and Earth. And I think that's a really needed thing too, but I don't place my beginning faith in that because it will turn off as many people as it will turn on. Well, I shouldn't be making such a harsh judgment. I should say that we need other ways to connect in addition to that so that people that aren't going to resonate with that can find other ways of connecting. And hey, could we start with the All Careers Initiative? It sounds rather innocuous maybe. Well, not innocuous, but not, as you say, woo-woo. There's all sorts of entry points, but the ultimate place we can come to talk about these ideas will still come towards this one reality that Earth is a living system entity and we're a part of it. Okay, well, we can take another question or two, but otherwise we can also formally end here, and I'd be happy to stick around and talk with folks going after the program here. So why don't we do that?